They could have treated him better.
I lost my mouse.
I've had a tough time.
I felt like dirt.
It's destroying
Really
people's
tough.
lives.
They ruined my life completely. In November 2016, Jocelyn John agreed a voluntary removal to Grenada, a country she had left aged 53 years earlier. The former Ritz chambermaid was wrongly classified as living in the UK illegally in 2009. She lost her job and spent years sleeping on relatives' sofas and floors. Despite 75 pages of evidence proving a lifetime spent here, the Home Office said that she faced detention unless she left the UK. So eventually, she agreed to self-deport.
He died being denied an immigration status, which was rightfully his. Dexter Bristol moved from Grenada to the UK in 1968, aged 8, to join his mother, who was working as an NHS nurse. He was sacked from his cleaning job in 2016 because he had no passport, was denied benefits, and became depressed. Dexter died while still trying to prove he was in this country legally.
I was born under the British flag. Lydden Lewis arrived in the UK aged 11 in 1961, a year before Jamaica became independent. He tried for many years to get a British passport, but was unable to pay the £900 fee. When he visited the Windrush Task Force headquarters in 2018, his original passport was seized, with officials saying they needed to investigate spent criminal records dating back 40 years.
I can't work now. George Poleon came to the UK from St. Lucia in 1968, age 15. He worked for 47 years and assumed he was British until he tried to claim benefits in 2014. He was told he was ineligible and became homeless, sleeping in the foyer of Homerton Hospital, East London. He found it impossible to persuade officials he was here legally, despite having more than 37 years of national insurance, tax, and medical records.
I want to see members of my family who are sick. Icilda Williams moved to the UK in 1962 and worked as an NHS paediatric nurse for 30 years before retiring to Jamaica. In 2014, she was refused application to return to visit her children in England. I don't understand it, she said. I've lived and worked in Great Britain nearly all my life. I looked after the country's children. We're a very close family. I'm scared I'll never see them again.
It is always at the back of your mind. Geoffrey Miller came from Grenada in 1966, aged 9, on his brother's passport. He was aware he needed to naturalise formally, but the process was expensive, and he was worried he didn't have all the documents required. He decided instead to avoid all contact with the state, but spent years worrying he was going to be arrested by immigration enforcement.
I am not the person I was. Gbolagade Ibukun-Oluwa has been homeless for 12 years and is sheltering most nights in cafes at Heathrow Airport, occasionally managing to sleep in his wheelchair. Before a serious car accident, he worked in this country for decades, having arrived from Nigeria in 1981. He has indefinite leave to remain, but lost the documents, and has spent years trying to persuade the Home Office he is here legally.
It's like a death sentence.
A British citizen with a UK passport, Pauline Pennant had retired to Jamaica after working as an NHS nurse for almost 30 years. When she became seriously ill during a visit to London for her son's wedding, she was told she had secondary bone cancer. She was referred to a specialist doctor and given a £4,388 bill, with officials saying she was not entitled to free NHS healthcare.
To be told you don't exist, it's overwhelming. Winston Walker arrived from Jamaica aged 18 months in 1966. He was refused a driving license in 2008. After contacting an MP for help, he was told he did not exist on any data in this country. He lost his job as a security guard and was out of work for 8 years, becoming destitute, homeless, and forced to beg on the streets. I was convinced I was an illegal immigrant. I got frightened.
He was frightened of being arrested. Eddie Lindsay arrived in England from Jamaica in 1960, aged 10. He was sacked from Tesco in 2012 because he had no British passport. The fact that he had lived in the UK for more than 50 years made no difference. The lack of documentation meant he was unable to marry the mother of his 2 daughters. He died in October 2017.
They could have treated me better after 52 years. Anthony Bryan was wrongly held for 5 weeks in immigration removal centres. In November 2017, immigration officers arrived at his home with a battering ram, arrested him, and booked him on a flight back to Jamaica, the country he had left when he was 8 in 1965 and had not visited since. After his case was highlighted in The Guardian, officials acknowledged he was in the UK legally.
I thought I would die. Bevis Smith arrived in London in 1972, aged 16. More than 40 years later, he was admitted into hospital with a brain aneurysm, where staff told him he may have to cover the £5,000 cost. While there, he lost his home because of his illegal residency status and was ineligible for a bed in a state-funded homeless hostel. So they discharged him to the streets. Eventually, a bed was found for him, and he spent years trying to prove his residency until in January 2018, the Home Office confirmed he had indefinite leave to remain. He's still waiting to be compensated.
I came back in a wheelchair. Pauline Clear arrived in 1960, aged 11, and worked as a social worker. She almost died after being prevented from returning to the UK from a holiday in Jamaica, having thought the official was joking when he said she couldn't get on the plane. It took 18 months before she was allowed home, during which time she lost her job and her 14-year-old daughter faced eviction. Unable to access diabetes medication in Jamaica, she was admitted to hospital twice.
I was numb. I felt cold. Briggs Levi Maynard came to London in 1957 and got a job as a bus conductor. After a lifetime of working here, he retired on a state pension in 1993. He travelled on his Barbadian passport many times without trouble. But in 2017 at Bridgetown Airport, he was told that he could not return to the UK because he had neither residency nor records of his immigration status.
It was like a punch into the stomach. Tony Perry arrived in Britain in 1959 from Jamaica. He served in the Navy,
later became a social worker for Haringey Council and also worked as a pastor. He was refused a passport in 2001. The Home Office told him, "We're sorry to inform you that you are not a British citizen." He was devastated. "I serve on Her Majesty's behalf. We were invited here and then thrown away again like rubbish."
The Home Office just wants me to lie down and die. Roy Harrison lives in a bin shed in South London and is not allowed to work as a gardener. He moved from Jamaica at the age of 6, having been convicted of theft, a crime he said he did not commit. The Home Office is trying to deport him. It really kills me that the Home Office wants to take me and put me somewhere I do not know.
I felt like I didn't exist. Paulette Wilson, a former cook at the House of Commons, arrived in the UK in 1968, aged 10. Almost 50 years later, she was told that she was here illegally, arrested twice and prevented from working. In October 2017, she was sent to an immigration detention centre for a week, taken to Heathrow for deportation to Jamaica. A last-minute intervention from her MP and a charity prevented her removal.
I didn't see my dad before he died. Noel Smith grew up in Jamaica with his grandparents while his parents worked in the UK. They struggled to bring him to England. After receiving short-term visas in the 1990s, Noel was allowed to stay for 6 months in 2002. He was required to sign in with the Home Office every month, but missed an appointment due to sickness. At his next visit, he was deported and told he couldn't return for 5 years. During this time, his father died.
I lost my house. Leighton Joseph Robinson's children took him to Jamaica for his 50th birthday, his first visit since arriving in Britain aged 6. But on his return, he was told that he's not allowed back into the UK because he has no visa. He was stuck in Jamaica for 21 months until a solicitor helped him. On his return, he was told he had to pay £4,500 in unpaid council tax and rent. He was made homeless.
They messed up my life. Hubert Howard died in November 2019 before receiving an apology or compensation. He spent the last 2 months of his life fighting for British citizenship from an intensive care bed. He was granted it 2 weeks before he died, and 59 years after he arrived, aged 3, from Jamaica in 1960. He worked all his life until 2012, when he was wrongly labelled an illegal immigrant by the Home Office and sacked from his job.
It scares the living daylights out of you. In February 2018, El Waldo Romeo received a letter from the Home Office citing the 1971 Immigration Act and telling him he was liable to be detained. It added that he had not been given leave to enter the United Kingdom and offered support on returning home, despite the fact that my uncle had moved to the UK from Antigua 59 years earlier, aged 4.
There should be more support. Lloyd Grant entered the UK in 1970, aged 11, and later worked for London Transport and Hackney Council. After losing his passport, the Home Office said they couldn't trace any records for him. This meant he was unable to work or claim benefits and had to borrow money from his siblings. He became homeless and feared deportation. He received no compensation.
I'm very, very angry. Having arrived in 1968, age 14, Brentford Mcintyre had worked as a driver for the NHS until he was sacked in 2014 because he had no documents proving he had the rights to live in the UK. He discovered he wasn't eligible for benefits. He was made homeless, forced to sleep in an industrial unit in Dudley. The man had worked and paid taxes in the UK for 35 years. Come on!
I was selling old trainers on eBay to survive. Glenda Caesar was sacked from her job as an administrator in a GP practice in 2009 because the Home Office refused to believe she was living in the UK legally, despite the fact that she'd been here since 1961, when she arrived aged 6 months. Glenda was denied unemployment benefits, and her daughter, who was deaf, shared her disability benefits with her mother to help her buy food.
It's grossly unfair. Sylvester Marshall arrived from Jamaica as a teenager in 1973 to join his mother, an NHS nurse. After 44 years of working as a mechanic, he was refused free radiotherapy cancer treatment when he could not show proof that he was in the UK legally. And he was asked to pay £54,000. He was made homeless by the council. After The Guardian highlighted his case, he received the treatment that he needed, and he has recovered.
I almost fell apart from the stress. Michael Braithwaite arrived with his family from Barbados in 1961. He lost his job as a special needs teaching assistant after the primary school where he had worked for more than 15 years deemed him an illegal alien, despite the fact that he had lived here for more than 50 years. It made me feel like an alien.
It has been hell. Boxer Vernon Van Riel was trapped in destitution in Jamaica for 13 years after being refused a visa to travel back to the UK, where he had lived for 43 years since moving there aged 6. He survived on the streets, finally ending up in a roadside shack with no electricity. Following Guardian publicity, a first-class British Airways ticket to London was couriered to him by the British High Commission.
It's destroying people's lives. Whitfield Francis came from Jamaica in 1959 with his 2 sisters when he was about 7 years old to join their parents. He worked for the Ministry of Defence repairing Royal Navy ships, but after being made redundant in 2014, he found no one would employ him because he had no proof of his right to live and work in the UK. His sisters faced similar problems.
I've paid taxes here all my life. Judy Griffith joined her parents in the UK in 1963. After 52 years, a job centre employee told her she was an illegal immigrant. And because her passport with evidence of leave to remain had been stolen, she was unable to work or travel. Judy could not visit her sick mother in Barbados in 2016 or attend her funeral. Without work, she got into significant arrears on her flat in London and narrowly escaped eviction. She's still waiting for compensation.
It was blatant discrimination. The former Middlesex bowler was 10 when he moved from Jamaica to London in 1955 to live with his older sister, who was working as a nurse. He was told he was an overstayer in 2012. He spent 7 years in immigration limbo, unable to afford the £1,400 fee for naturalisation. Richard Wes Stewart had hoped to visit his mother's grave in Jamaica, but died in June 2019.
I was like a lamb to the slaughter. After he arrived back from a trip to Jamaica for his sister's funeral in 1998, immigration officials gave Ivan Anglin 48 hours to pack up 35 years of life in the UK and return to Heathrow to be deported. He only had time to say goodbye to one of his daughters. He was exiled for 20 years, missing the births of his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, and the death and funeral of his only son.
I've never felt like I was accepted by this system. A reggae musician who arrived in Bristol in 1968, aged 12, died from cancer about a month after finally winning his long, hard battle for citizenship. It was too late for him to travel back to Jamaica. This father of 5 told the BBC that he was unable to travel for fear of being denied re-entry back into the UK. So he never got his final wish for one last holiday, just to be free, before he died late last year.
I think we all need a personal apology. Valerie Baker arrived from Jamaica in 1955, age 4. She worked her whole adult life until chronic back problems forced early retirement. In April 2017, the Home Office told her she had no legal basis to remain in the UK, and if she didn't leave within 7 days, she could be deported. Further letters told Valerie her disability allowance had been stopped, and she needed to return overpayments of £33,590.
It's inhumane. Kenneth Williams arrived in Britain in 1969 on his sibling's passport. In 2015, the council, who he had been working for via an agency, refused direct employment without a passport. He was suspended on full pay, but told to leave. He had a mortgage and no access to benefits, so he had to rely on family and friends. He was then finally given a card confirming indefinite leave to remain in August 2017.
I am angry, but what can I do? Edward Bromfield was evicted by Haringey's council in 2018 because he was unable to prove he was living in the country legally, despite having arrived as a child 47 years earlier. When he was evicted, his clothes, possessions, and the gardening tools he used for work were destroyed. He slept in a friend's shed for 6 months and applied for the government's hardship fund, but was unsuccessful.
You can't put a price on missing your mother's funeral. Junior Green had lived in the UK since he was 5 months old. In 2017, he visited his dying mother in Jamaica, to where their parents had returned, but was refused readmission back to the UK. Eventually, he was granted a temporary visa, but the delay in getting this meant he missed his mother's funeral, which was being held back in the UK.
It was hell. British Airways staff blocked Hyacinth Naylor from boarding a plane home after a trip to Tobago, leaving her stranded there for 6 months, struggling to persuade officials that Britain was her home. The secretary had come to the UK from Jamaica in 1960, aged 10, but was forced into early retirement in 2013, unable to prove to employers that she was in the UK legally.
Our forefathers did a lot for this country. Gladstone Wilson arrived in Britain in 1968, aged 12, to join his father, who was a head teacher in the West Midlands. He worked as a hospital security guard, but lost his job when the Home Office classified him as an illegal immigrant. He faced financial hardships and he missed his mother's funeral in Jamaica because he could not get a passport.
I didn't apply to get into this mess, but now I have to apply to get out of it. Winston Robinson arrived from Jamaica aged 9 in 1966. He was sacked from his job as an ambulance driver in 2016 because he had no passport. The Home Office wrote to him saying, "According to our records, you have no lawful basis to be in the UK. You should take steps to leave the UK immediately." When he lost his job, Winston was told he was not eligible for benefit payments. He became homeless when he couldn't pay his rent.
They made me feel like I'm not British. One of the most vocal Windrush campaigners, Sarah O'Connor, died in September 2018. Officials mistakenly classified her as being in the country illegally, unable to work and not eligible for benefits. She had to sell her car and her clothes. The scandal reminded her of the racism that she faced in the 1970s. It feels like it has become a hostile country again.
I felt crushed and wanted to call it a day. Son of a nurse and bus conductor, Andrew Bynum arrived to London from Barbados in 1978, aged 12. Sacked from his job because he wasn't able to prove that he was from England legally. He was consequently unable to pay his rent and became homeless in August 2019. Sometimes sleeping in his son's van or night buses. Andrew Bynum lost his head to stress and contemplated suicide. He still needs emergency help.
I was born here. I haven't left the country. London-born Courtney Lawrence faced homelessness with her 2-year-old son when she was denied emergency housing because she couldn't produce a passport to prove she was eligible for council support. The parents arrived in the UK as small children and were never formally naturalised as British citizens, so neither of them had British passports. Although also born in London, Courtney's son's immigration status is uncertain.
My life is in ruins. David Jameson moved to London with his grandmother in 1966 when he was 6. The former builder was deported in June 2013 and twice tried to kill himself while in the detention centre awaiting deportation. In Kingston, he became homeless and was forced to sleep in derelict buildings. It is extremely painful.
I've had a tough time. Really tough. Hubert Lindsay faced deportation as he struggled to prove his immigration status, despite having lived in the UK for 45 years. After losing his Jamaican passport in 1990, he could not get a new one as he had no other relevant form of ID. The Devon chef was stripped of his assets and faced a long battle to stay in the country.
I felt like dirt. Margaret O'Brien moved from Canada to Wolverhampton in 1971, started a family and worked for the local council for more than 25 years as a dinner lady, Meals on Wheels driver, lollipop lady, and cleaner. In 2015, she was told that her disability payments had been suspended because she was in the country illegally, and the Home Office told her she faced a 6-month prison sentence or deportation to Canada.
I'll never trust the English again. A former Midlands youth worker, Melvin Collins, was stranded in Jamaica in 2015 when his passport was revoked without explanation at the end of his holiday. He was stuck, living alone in a flat owned by his 92-year-old Aunt Lena, 7,400 miles away from his daughter, son, brother, sister, nieces, nephews, all in the UK.
This is an insult. Herman Campbell arrived in the UK in 1975, aged 8. But when he applied for a British passport in the 1990s, the Home Office had no record of him. Without the necessary documentation, he had problems securing housing, and in 2017 he was refused re-entry to the UK after going on holiday to Turkey on his Jamaican passport. He described the £250 sum he was offered in compensation as offensive.
I'm still tense and nervous. Nic Broderick arrived in the UK in the early 1960s, aged 3, with his mother, an NHS nurse. He was sacked from his job in 2016 after immigration enforcement made checks. When told he was going to be deported, Nic made plans to kill himself.
I just want justice. When he was diagnosed with kidney cancer in 2016, Donald Biggs had to pay a £500 NHS immigration surcharge to receive treatment after his applications for a British passport and citizenship were rejected. He had lived in Britain since arriving from Jamaica in 1965, aged 5, and he had worked as a social care worker for 25 years.
My ancestors were slaves on a British plantation. Donald Thompson arrived in the UK from Jamaica in 1967, aged 12, to join his mother who was working as a nurse in the NHS. He spent most of his adult life in the country and tried repeatedly to apply for citizenship, but was rejected. He was held in detention for a month and threatened with deportation. This has been a great injustice which will be written about in the history books.